My purpose in this film is to supplement the booklet I wrote, also called On the Essence of Pictorial Form. The ideas I propose are not my own, but the province of all great art. I became aware of them through two artist teachers, Hans Hofmann and Cameron Booth, both of whom are cited by Earl Oran as influencing him in his classic study, Cézanne's composition. Not only have the basic concepts of form he wrote about gone out of fashion, but are now virtually unknown. It is this situation I wish to help rectify. In drawing the model, there are two worlds I am working in. The first is the world of reality, in which the model, you and I, exist. The second is the world of the drawing. It consists of a flat surface and four sides of a rectangle. Everything I do must be consistent with these inherent limitations. As I study the model, I choose to draw a line of the arm. The line is drawn. This divides the rectangle into a proportion I find pleasing. Thus, I have established the relationship shown here. My instincts tell me another line is called for. I draw the breast, which establishes the arm in space. The breasts fall back, creating depth by overlapping 1, 2, and 3. This backward motion calls for a reaction, so I again study the model and decide the left hand on the back of the chair can act as a counterforce to the breasts. The hand comes forward and also further divides the rectangle horizontally and vertically. These forces, I feel, necessitate a form pulling up and back. The neck and jaw of the model suggests the solution. Now we have three complexes, one going down and back, two going back and to the right, three pulling up and forward. Next, I feel lines indicating the right thigh and lower leg are needed to contain the upward pull of the jaw and neck. The lines are drawn. As you see, each line is called for by a prior action. The drawing is always kept in balance. What I am doing is translating the natural world into a new universe of a rectangle and the flat surface. It is similar to translating French into English. In French, I would say, je le lui ai donné. In order to translate this into English, I must change I it to him gave to I gave it to him. The real world, in a like manner, has to be translated into the world of art. Cézanne said they are like two parallel tracks going in the same direction. I continue the drawing and let one form call for another until the picture is completed. The plane should form one unit, moving back and forth, left and right, each dividing the rectangle into viable proportions. By doing this, I will have created an organism that has its own life and exists in its own timeless universe. Notice how in this painting, Rembrandt creates a void between the table and the back wall. The wall pulls back and to the left, while the table thrusts forward and to the right. Each pulls with sufficient force to counteract the other, while at the same time containing it. Interspersed in this void are the 6 drapers, whose faces and collars move forward and back at calculated intervals, creating spatial rhythms within the void. Draper 2 moves up and forward. Draper 3 moves forward and down. Draper 4 moves up and back. Draper 5 moves down to the right and forward, while Drapers 1 and 6 anchor both ends. These forms move basically because of their placement in the rectangle and relation to one another. Hans Hofmann might call this push and pull, others point and counterpoint. Also notice the proportionate divisions of the rectangle that resemble a Mondrian-like grid. The result is a world of unity that exists on its own because of interlocking spatial relationships. The red planes, 1 and 2, plus the two figures, 3 and 4, basically structure this painting. The plane furthest back is the black and green leaf motif, 5, which slides behind the red planes. The red plane with the yellow grid moves to the left and down, while the larger red plane moves up and to the right. The figures reinforce this movement, with the figure on the left pulling down and the figure on the right pulling up and back. This backward motion is countered by the green table, the sheet of music, and apple, A, which by overlapping come forward. The left leg of the lady in blue, B, moves up and back, responding to this forward motion of the table. The end result is a symphony of forms responding to one another. One pulling up, another pulling down. One pulling forward, another pulling back. One pulling left, another pulling right, each containing one another while still maintaining the integrity of the flat surface. It is indeed a symphony of forms and color, thus making music an appropriate title. Also, it should be noted, each form is at its fullest without any area contracting. This, I feel, is an attribute of all great art. The sculptural quality of this painting is basically achieved by its placement of rectangular planes. They are like building blocks. For teaching purposes, I've outlined them black. Viewed independently, they could be a painting by Hans Hofmann, where the planes move and shift, come forward and back, left and right, creating just the right spatial tension to keep each other in check. They also divide the rectangle at strategic points, creating viable proportions and relationships. This doesn't mean that Picasso first plotted these rectangles and built his figures around them. Not at all. It does mean when he painted his figures, he was aware of these forces. It was no accident they fit so beautifully together and convey such exceptional sculptural qualities. Interesting are the main positions of the arm. Planes 1 and 2 recede in space. Plane 3 shifts and begins a forward motion. Planes 4 and 5 continue to advance in space. The arms create their own complex while contributing to the overall spatial life. The folded and unfolded sections of the robes offer a vivid contrast to each other. Notice the strong vertical lines of the figure on the left, contrasted by the soft curved folds on the right. The net result is a truly plastic painting. Plastic here meaning creating depth while still maintaining the integrity of the flat surface. The three figures and the tree set the spatial relationships and structure for this painting. Narcissus, the long horizontal plane 1, is the most forward form in this picture. Planes 2, Echo, and 3, the tree, move back in a fan-like motion. Cupid and his folded cloth, plane 4, counter this by moving forward behind Narcissus. Of particular interest is Echo and the rock complex she is leaning on. 3 planes, rock A, Echo B, and a second boulder C, overlap and shift, creating a backward pull, which suddenly falls further to the right, with plane D, the tree, being the plane farthest back. Seen together with the other planes I have diagrammed, we have the basis for a cubist or abstract painting, which, although Poussin was a classical painter, his thinking was in terms of plastic or planal construction. No wonder Cezanne revered him. Also notice that the main horizontal and vertical divisions anchor the painting firmly within the rectangle. What I want to emphasize by including Poussin and Rembrandt in this presentation is that the concepts I've been discussing were prime considerations of all great artists. Thus, Picasso and Matisse were modern in terms of style and vision, but their feeling for form was rooted in traditional concepts. I feel it fitting that the last picture I analyze should be by Braque, who I feel, through his aphorisms, has written most knowledgeably about the concepts I've tried to convey. For example, I admire his statement that progress in art does not consist in extending one's limitations, but in knowing them better. This painting is truly a ballet in space. Plane 1 is closest to the viewer, pulling up and forward. Plane 2, the black plane, pulls down and back, while plane 3 pulls further back and up. Planes 4, 5, and 6, the blue plane, continue this backward motion, while plane 7, also blue, counters by pulling up and to the right. You can almost measure the distance between these planes, which is achieved by overlapping and directional pull, and not by perspective. These planes are anchored to the edges by a series of fan-like forms, A, B, C, D. Of course, no violin looks like this. Braque simply reinterpreted this instrument in terms of the pictorial universe and made something that pulsates with life. The painting is alive, it breathes, and it has its own vitality because it works within the limitations imposed on it. Compare this Braque painting to a realistic rendering of a violin. Here the oval is a window. We can look through the window and see a drawing that reflects the reality we live in. In terms of the pictorial universe, it has no existence. It is dead and makes no sense. In terms of my language analogy, it reads, I it to him gave, instead of I gave it to him. This doesn't mean all painting must be abstract. 99% of the history of art is made up of some form of figurative representation. It does mean that reality has to be reinterpreted in terms of the pictorial universe in order to have any profundity.
Why haven't you included any of your own work as examples in this presentation?
I didn't want people to think I was engaged in self-promotion.
What changed your mind?
A feeling that just expounding concepts would not be enough to hold people's attention. Showing where I was coming from as an artist would also better convince others of my own validity. Indeed, if they saw merit in my own work, they would more readily accept my premises.
You mentioned in the introduction to this film that you had studied with Cameron Booth and Hans Hofmann. What was that experience like?
With Cameron Booth, I got along well. With Hofmann, it was different. He was like a lion, and I was only 21 or 22 at the time, and greatly intimidated by him.
Did you understand what he was saying?
I understood perfectly well what he was saying, even though he had a thick German accent. Werden geht mit der Pushen der Pull, nicht wahr? I even realized nicht wahr meant isn't that so? My problem was, no matter how much I struggled, I couldn't get forms to work.
How long did that last?
Almost a year. Finally, in the last session I was with him, it was a summer class in Provincetown, Mass., August 1951, and I was scheduled to be inducted into the Army in late August for service during the Korean War. Next to Hoffman's summer house was a barn he converted into a studio. The model posed on the first floor, as were most of the students. I was on a second tier on the side. For some reason, things suddenly came together for me, and I produced a drawing of the model where the forms worked perfectly. It consisted only of 3 planes, but Picasso, Braque, or Matisse would have been proud of it. Hoffman wouldn't even climb the stairs to the second tier to see my work, and indicated that I should show it to him over the railing. I, of course, complied. Then a curious, incredulous expression crossed his face, which he nodded up and down and repeated, "Not bad, not bad." Naturally, I felt exalted, and 3 weeks later was inducted into the Army, happy as a lark.
Did your difficulty in Hoffman's class adversely affect you?
No, just the opposite. Once I learned I could create a plastic composition, I never let go. Others picked it up more readily, but once they were out of his class, completely forgot what he was talking about. At least it was never reflected in their work. With me, I worked too hard to learn it, and it became part of my being.
What happened when you got out of the service?
I got out of the service in June 1953 and planned my life as follows. For the next 10 years, between the ages of 25 and 35, I would try different things. I worked as an animation artist, wrote and drew a cartoon strip for 2 years, and even tried being a playwright. I felt if I lived to 65, the average life expectancy at that time, I would have had 30 years to prove my worth as an artist.
Can we see some of your work now?
Sure. As you see, I'm not above being influenced by others. In this case, my love of Vermeer and Balthus is evident. This painting is one of my earlier works. You can see how forms move back and forth, complementing one another, and are unambiguous in their placement in space.
Do you work from studies to completion? Just how do you work?
I make a simple pencil sketch, generally on a 5x7-inch index card, and transfer it in charcoal to the canvas. It's all very unfinished and simply a way of getting started.
And then?
I work a little more on the drawing to better relate it to the larger space on the canvas. In no way do I make clearly defined areas and fill them in like a coloring book. Rather, I keep the painting loose, painting a line which calls for another line, which may call for a plane and then another plane, while always aware of how the planes move and divide the rectangle. Invariably, the forms will call for a color, which may call for another color, which may call for a line, etc. One thing calls for another until the painting is complete, which may be weeks or months later. Usually the finished painting bears little resemblance to my original sketch. It reminds me of Delacroix's sage comment, "The main reason I paint is to see what the painting will look like when I'm finished." Invariably in the process of painting, forms are changed and new forms are suggested. This painting has motifs which I frequently use: horses, harlequins, fruit, and especially decor of more classical times.
The scenes you choose seem to have a similar thread. Can you explain why?
As already mentioned, one of the areas I explored when I got out of the service was playwriting. I was attracted to French theater of the 1920s and 30s, especially Girardot and Enoille. I also liked the Italian playwright Pirandello and his play 6 Characters in Search of an Author.
Did you have any success in this area?
None at all. I could write witty dialogue, but after 2 acts, the characters were in the same situation they were in scene 1. Nothing moved in the play except the actors' mouths.
How did this theater interest affect your painting?
I love the lyrical and classical qualities of these plays and tried to get this flavor into my paintings. Every year I try to paint one still life. Perhaps I feel this subject matter is purer because there is no storytelling involved. This painting is as close as I've ever come to cubism. There is a precision and mathematical quality in it that I'm comfortable with. I've always been impressed by the dramatic quality of Géricault's Raft of the Medusa, based on a true incident of a French ship that was sunk and the ordeal of its survivors. This must have been in the back of my mind when one of my compositions suggested that theme, and I proceeded to paint my own version of that event.
What is your feeling about the art scene today?
I feel it's a far cry from what it was in 1950 and before.
In what way?
Between 1850 and 1950, there was an extraordinary development in painting. The process started with the Impressionists, then came Cézanne, then the Cubists, and finally modern art was in full bloom. The concepts of form I've described flourished. They were the focus of Western art, but after 1950, things changed. Most of the famous modern painters had died or were quite aged. They were replaced by a new generation of painters.
How did the art scene change?
The buzzword for success was now avant-garde. Change for the sake of change was the mantra. The success of Cézanne and the School of Paris proved to many people that the new and different would inevitably be successful. The concepts of form and structure that were the basis of this success meant little. They were difficult to understand and more difficult to do, so why bother? The category now called contemporary art had found its roots.
You seem to have little hope for the future.
Not at all. During fallow periods in art, there always have been artists who've had a profound feeling for form. During the 17th century, when the Mannerists flourished, in the 18th century, there were Poussin, Rembrandt, Velázquez, Rubens, and later Watteau, Fragonard, Boucher, Louis Le Nain, Chardin, and Goya.
So, there is hope for the future.
Of course there is, but that doesn't mean one shouldn't try to make one's views known.
Which you are now doing.
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Mr. Casper.
Thank you.